This is a story of a love that refused to stay buried beneath the waves, and a man who learned that duty is a cold companion when the heart is screaming for the truth. If this tale of secrets and second chances stirs your soul, please subscribe and leave a comment telling me what is the one secret you would risk everything to keep. Part 1. The Weight of Silence. The sea was a cruel mistress, but she was an honest one. She did not pretend to be anything other than a hungry, roiling grave. For Alistair St. Clair, the Duke of Thornefield, the ocean had become a personal adversary. He stood at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the grey, churning Atlantic, his black greatcoat whipping like a wounded wing in the gale. It had been 18 months since the Lady Celeste had vanished into the froth and foam, taking with it the woman who had shared his name, but never quite his soul. Eleanor. He could barely remember the sound of her laughter, only the polite, measured tone of her voice as she bid him good night in the draughty corridors of Thornefield Hall. Theirs had been a marriage of convenience, a union of lands and titles, of duty and propriety. He had been the stoic duke, she the quiet, marginalized wife, who moved through his life like a ghost even before the shipwreck made her one. "Your Grace," a voice cut through the wind. Alistair didn't turn. He knew the voice. It was his steward, Mr. Harrison, the only man who dared to disturb the Duke's ritualistic communion with the sea. "The invitations for the engagement ball have been drafted. Lady Catherine's father expects your signature on the contracts by Friday." "Lady Catherine?" Alistair repeated, the name tasting like ash. Catherine was the daughter of an earl, vivacious, politically advantageous, and utterly hollow. She was the perfect replacement for a duchess who had left nothing behind but a drawer full of unused embroidery silk and a lingering scent of lavender in a room Alistair hadn't entered in a year. "The line must continue, Harrison," Alistair said, his voice a low, raspy growl. "A duke cannot mourn a ghost forever. Duty demands a living wife, not a memory." But as he looked out at the water, his chest felt tight, as if the very salt air were crystallizing in his lungs. He had never told Eleanor he loved her. He hadn't even been sure he did. But in her absence, the silence of Thornefield had become a deafening roar. He had buried his grief under layers of cold marble and political ambition, convincing the world and himself that he was a man of stone. Miles away, in a manner that smelled of old paper and malice, a woman sat by a window, watching the same sea. She did not know her name. To the servants of Lord Vernon, she was simply the castaway. To Lord Vernon himself, she was a prize, a weapon he had plucked from the wreckage of the coast and kept hidden, like a dagger up a sleeve. "You are looking pale today, my dear," a smooth, oily voice drifted from the doorway. Lord Vernon stepped into the room. He was a man of sharp angles and sharper eyes, Alistair's most bitter rival in the House of Lords. He had found her washed up on the private shingle of his estate, half dead and shivering, her memory a blank slate wiped clean by the trauma. "I am fine, my lord," she whispered. Her voice felt foreign in her own throat, a rusty instrument she was still learning to play. "You must be more than fine," Vernon said, stepping closer, his hand lingering uncomfortably long on her shoulder. "We are going to London. There is a ball, a celebration for the Duke of Thornefield's new engagement. It would be ungentlemanly of me not to bring a guest of such mystery." The name Thornefield sent a sharp, agonizing prick of heat through her mind, a flash of a tall man with eyes the color of a winter sky, a man who looked at her with a distance that felt like a physical bruise. Thornefield, she breathed, the word a prayer and a curse. Does it sound familiar? Vernon asked, his eyes narrowing with a predatory gleam. She shook her head quickly, looking back at the sea. No, it is just a word. But her hand went instinctively to the hidden pocket of her gown, where she had sewn the document she had carried through the waves. She couldn't read the legal jargon, but she knew with a primal certainty that it was the reason she had survived. It was a secret that could burn Thornefield to the ground or save the man whose face haunted her dreams. She was a ghost returning to the world of the living, and she had no idea that the man she was going to see was the one who had already signed her death certificate in his heart. Back at Thornefield, Alistair sat in his study, the marriage contract spread before him like a death warrant. He dipped his quill into the ink, the black liquid gleaming like the eye of a raven. He thought of Eleanor, the way she used to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she had once tried to talk to him about the farmers' cottages and how he had dismissed her with a wave of his hand, citing more pressing matters of state. He had been a fool. He had valued the crown over the heart, the title over the woman, and now he was about to bind himself to another woman he didn't want, to fulfill a duty that felt like a cage. "To the future," he muttered, the quill scratching harshly against the parchment as he signed his name. He didn't see the shadow in the doorway. He didn't feel the shift in the wind. He only felt the crushing weight of the Duke's crown, unaware that the sea was finally ready to give up its dead and that the truth was coming for him with the force of a tidal wave. Part 2. The Apparition at the Ball. London in the season was a swirl of champagne, silk, and predatory smiles, but for Alistair it felt like a funeral procession. Thornefield House was ablaze with 1,000 beeswax candles, their light reflecting off the diamonds dripping from Lady Catherine's throat. This was his engagement ball, the moment his transition from grieving widower to political powerhouse was meant to be solidified. "You look as though you are heading to the gallows, Alistair," his brother, Lord Julian, murmured, leaning against a marble pillar with a glass of brandy. "I am doing what is required," Alistair replied, his voice a clipped frost. He adjusted his lace cravat, his eyes scanning the crowd without seeing them. "The St. Clair line requires stability. Catherine provides it." "She provides a headache and a hefty dowry," Julian countered, "but she isn't Eleanor." Alistair's jaw tightened so hard it ached. Eleanor is gone. The sea does not return what it takes. But the sea was more capricious than Alistair knew. At the entrance of the ballroom, the herald's staff struck the floor. "Lord Vernon and his ward." A hush rippled through the room. Lord Vernon was the Duke's most virulent enemy, a man who had spent a decade trying to dismantle Alistair's influence in the House of Lords. His presence was an insult, a calculated intrusion, but it was the woman on his arm that caused the breath to die in Alistair's throat. She was dressed in a gown of shimmering silver grey, the colour of a storm-tossed wave. A delicate mask covered the upper half of her face, but there was no mistaking the curve of that jaw, the trembling grace of her carriage, or the way she held her head, slanted slightly to the left, as if listening for a melody only she could hear. The glass in Alistair's hand shattered. Red wine bloomed like a bloodstain across his white waistcoat, but he didn't feel the sting of the glass or the wetness of the liquid. He walked forward, his boots thudding rhythmically across the parquet floor, a man in a trance. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. "Vernon,"
Alistair hissed, his eyes fixed entirely on the woman. What mockery is this?
Vernon smiled, a slow, oily curl of the lips. Mockery, Your Grace? I simply thought your celebration lacked a certain spirit. May I introduce my ward, Miss Clara? I found her lost and wandering, quite without a history of her own. The woman, Eleanor, looked up. Her eyes met Alistair's, and for a heartbeat the amnesia that clouded her mind flickered. A flash of memory struck her, the smell of this man's shaving soap, the weight of his silence in a library filled with leather-bound books, the way he had looked at her the day she boarded the Lady Celeste, with a cool, distant nod that had broken her heart. "Your Grace," she whispered. Her voice was the sound of a ghost finding its tongue. "Eleanor," Alistair breathed, reaching out a hand as if to touch a phantom. "I am Clara," she said, her voice trembling, though her hand went instinctively to the bodice of her dress, where the secret document lay hidden against her skin. She had come here to warn him, to stop Vernon from using the papers she had found to ruin the Thornefield estate, but seeing him, seeing his fiancée, Lady Catherine, standing frozen in the background, made the world tilt. "The Duke is confused," Vernon interrupted, stepping between them with a proprietary sneer. "He sees his late wife in every shadow. It is a tragic symptom of his prolonged mourning." "Get out," Alistair growled, his hand moving to the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "Take your ward and leave this house before I forget my station." "Wait," Eleanor cried, her memory sparking like flint. "Alistair, the document, the Northfield land grants, he has them, he means to—" But Vernon's hand clamped onto her arm with bruising force. "The poor girl is deluded. The fever, you understand." Alistair watched them retreat, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. The room was spinning, his guests were whispering, their fans fluttering like the wings of carrion birds. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had spent 18 months convincing himself he felt nothing. He had built a fortress of duty to keep the pain out. But seeing her, alive yet lost to him, standing on the arm of his greatest enemy, tore the fortress down to the foundations. She wasn't a ghost, she was flesh and blood, and she was in danger. "Alistair," Lady Catherine approached, her face a mask of indignation. "Who was that creature? You cannot possibly mean to let this scandal stand." Alistair looked at his fiancée, and for the first time he saw her clearly. She was the duty he had chosen. She was the safe, cold path, and he realized with a soul-deep clarity that he would rather burn in the scandal of the century than let Eleanor slip back into the darkness. "The engagement is ended," Alistair said, his voice ringing through the silent ballroom. "You can't be serious," she shrieked. "Your reputation, the House of Lords." "The House of Lords can go to the devil," Alistair roared, turning toward the door where Vernon had disappeared. "My wife has come home." He ran. He didn't care about the whispers or the disgrace. He ran into the night, the rain beginning to fall, chasing the carriage that held the woman he had failed to love when he had the chance, and the woman he would now tear the world apart to save. The rain fell in a drenching sheet as Alistair reached Vernon's town estate. He didn't knock. He put his shoulder to the oak door, the wood splintering under the weight of a man who finally had something to lose. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old malice. He found them in the library, Vernon standing over Eleanor, his hand outstretched for the leather cylinder she clutched like a holy relic. "Give it to me, you foolish girl," Vernon hissed, his mask of civility entirely gone.
That document proves the Thornefield title was predicated on a fraudulent grant from the Regency. With it, I can strip St. Clair of every acre. Without it, you are just a nameless girl who should have stayed in the Atlantic." "I remember," Eleanor whispered, her voice gaining a strength that stopped Alistair in his tracks. "I remember the night I left. I found this in your study while Alistair was at the club. I took it to protect him, even though he never looked at me. I was going to my father's to hide it, but the storm, the ship—" "Eleanor!" Alistair's voice broke the tension. She turned, her eyes wide, as they landed on Alistair, soaked to the bone, his eyes wild with a desperate, raw devotion. The final veil of her amnesia tore away. She remembered the coldness of their marriage, yes, but she also remembered the one moment years ago when he had looked at her with a fleeting softness that had made her stay. "Alistair," she breathed, her memory clicking into place like a key in a lock.
"The papers, Alistair," Vernon laughed, pulling a pistol from his waistcoat. "Or the wife. You can have one, but the other belongs to the fire." He lunged for the fireplace, the document in hand, but Alistair didn't move for the papers. He didn't care about the land, the gold, or the title that had been his cage for so long. He lunged for Eleanor, throwing his body in front of her as Vernon fired. The shot went wide, shattering a porcelain vase, but the struggle was brief. Alistair, fueled by 18 months of repressed agony, disarmed Vernon with a single brutal blow. He pinned the man against the mahogany desk, his hand around his throat. "I spent my life choosing duty over her," Alistair snarled. "I will not make that mistake again. Take the papers, take the title. If I have to be a beggar on the streets of London, I will do it with my wife by my side." Vernon, seeing the sheer madness of a man who had discarded his own power, wilted. The document fell to the floor, forgotten. Alistair let him go, turning instead to Eleanor. He didn't care about the scandal that would surely follow. He didn't care about the ruined engagement or the whispers of the ton. He fell to his knees before her, taking her cold, trembling hands in his. "I am sorry," he whispered, his forehead resting against her knuckles. "I let you be a ghost in your own home. I thought being a duke meant being a statue. I was wrong. Please, if you can remember anything, remember that I will spend every breath I have left making you feel seen." Eleanor looked down at the man who had always been so stoic, so untouchable, and saw the tears tracking through the rain and grime on his face. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I remember everything, Alistair," she said softly. "The distance and the fire. Let us leave the distance behind." Months later, Thornefield Hall was no longer a tomb. The windows were thrown open to the sea air, and the scent of lavender was joined by the smell of fresh ink and new beginnings. The scandal had broken, but Alistair's honesty had blunted the blow. He had faced the House of Lords, settled the disputes over his lands, and emerged not just as a duke, but as a man. Vernon was exiled to the continent, his reputation in tatters. Alistair and Eleanor stood on the same cliffs where he had once mourned her. This time his arm was around her waist, drawing her close against the evening chill. "The sea gave you back," Alistair murmured into her hair. "No," Eleanor replied, looking at him with a bright, steady gaze. "The sea just held me until you were ready to truly look for me." He kissed her then, not a kiss of duty or propriety, but a kiss born of fire and truth. The Duke of Thornefield had finally learned that the greatest title a man can hold is the one he earns in the heart of the woman he loves.
The end. I hope this journey through the waves and the heart was everything you imagined.